Pack your things. You don't belong here anymore. Out in the rain is where you'll stay." The words echoed like knives, slicing through the silence of the Donovan estate. Mariah stood shivering at the mansion gates, the same gates she once entered as a wife, now shut against her as though she were a stranger. The stepchildren, flushed with wealth, smirked as security carried her belongings into the mud. How could a woman who had given her heart, her loyalty, and her dignity be erased in a single night? How could the love of a husband mean nothing once? His voice was silenced by death. However, they did not know that the truth had not been buried. It was waiting, sealed in a letter that would turn their triumph into begging. This is the story of betrayal, inheritance, and justice returned. Welcome, story lovers. From where are you watching? Hit the like button and drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. It was a life built on quiet strength and dignity. Mariah had grown up understanding struggle, but she never let it define her. As a black woman in a world that often tried to erase her worth, she carried herself with a calm grace that demanded respect without ever asking for it. When she married Charles Donovan, a billionaire with a reputation for brilliance and compassion, people whispered. They doubted her, questioned her place by his side, and assumed she had married for money. But Mariah knew the truth. Theirs was a marriage rooted in love, trust, and an unshakable bond that money could never buy. Charles's children from his first marriage never accepted her. They treated her like a guest in her own home, politely smiling in public but cold and dismissive behind closed doors. Mariah ignored their sharp looks and cutting remarks, telling herself that love would eventually soften their hearts. She poured her energy into her husband, supporting him through late nights and boardroom battles, never caring about the millions that surrounded them. For her, wealth meant little. What mattered was the life they built together. But behind the grandeur of the Donovan estate, its sprawling gardens, marble halls, and priceless paintings, there lingered a shadow. Mariah sensed it in the way the stepchildren whispered when she entered a room, or how they locked eyes with one another whenever Charles spoke warmly about her. Something unspoken hovered in the air, like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. Mariah didn't know it yet, but the stability she cherished was about to shatter. The life she had so carefully nurtured, the fragile peace she maintained, would soon be ripped away. And when it happened, the very people who smiled at her table would be the ones to push her into the cold. The storm arrived sooner than Mariah could have imagined. Charles's sudden passing left the world stunned. Newspapers filled their front pages with tributes to the billionaire visionary. Still, inside the Donovan estate, grief gave way to greed. The funeral had barely ended when the whispers began. Charles's 3 children gathered in corners of the mansion, their voices hushed but urgent. Mariah noticed the way they avoided her gaze, how their smiles grew thinner and their words sharper with each passing day. Then came the reading of the will. Mariah walked into the oak-paneled study with her heart heavy, expecting sorrow, not suspicion. But the children sat tall, their faces lit with anticipation. When the lawyer's words revealed that the bulk of the fortune, $64 million in assets, was to pass directly into their hands, a flicker of triumph lit their eyes. Mariah's name was mentioned only in passing, tied vaguely to personal effects and vague assurances. Shock rippled through her, but before she could ask a question, the lawyer folded his papers and the children rose with smug certainty. In the days that followed, their cruelty sharpened. Access to the estate's accounts vanished overnight. Servants who had once respected her now turned cold, their loyalties bought by the new heirs. Mariah's car keys were taken, her bedroom locks changed, and her belongings shoved into boxes. One evening, under a pouring sky, she stood at the mansion's iron gates as the children ordered security to escort her out. No warmth, No dignity, just rain soaking her clothes as the gates clanged shut behind her. Neighbors whispered about the disgrace, about how a woman who had stood by a powerful man could be cast aside like a stranger. Yet Mariah said nothing. Pride kept her from begging. Dignity kept her from fighting. She rented a small room on the outskirts of town, surviving quietly on meager savings, her once vibrant world reduced to silence and shadows. Each day she carried herself as though nothing had been taken, but inside, the pain was deeply carved. 3 months passed. The children flaunted their new wealth in magazines and high society events, portraying Mariah as little more than an opportunist who had gotten what she deserved. However, arrogance has a way of blinding one. Hidden in Charles's private vault was a sealed letter, one that the children had ignored in their haste to claim everything. When it finally emerged, the contents shattered their illusion of victory. The letter revealed that while the children had inherited wealth, Mariah had been named the true heir to something far greater, the controlling shares of Charles's empire, the very foundation of his fortune. With one signature, the power shifted entirely into her hands, and so the balance began to tilt. The children who had laughed as she stood in the rain now realized they were powerless without her. Their empire was hers, their future bound to the woman they had scorned. The revelation of Charles's sealed letter struck the Donovan children like lightning. For weeks, they had basked in their supposed victory, parading their inherited millions, before flashing cameras dismissing Mariah as nothing more than a forgotten shadow. But the truth ripped through their pride. Their father had entrusted the very heart of his empire, not to them, but to the woman they had thrown into the rain. When Mariah returned to the Donovan estate, it was not as the grieving widow they had mocked, but as the legal controller of everything they claimed to own. The polished lawyers who once bent to the children's will now turned their chairs toward her, offering her the respect she had long been denied. The boardroom, which had once felt hostile, now echoed with silence as documents stamped her name. Across every controlling share, the children's faces paled. Their empire, their lavish lifestyles, their imagined superiority, it all crumbled in an instant. They had money, yes, but money without power was nothing in a world where influence ruled. And influence now sat firmly in Mariah's hands. The same heirs who had exiled her now stood before her door, drenched in desperation, pleading for the mother figure they had cast aside. Their arrogance dissolved into trembling apologies. Their superiority replaced with fear. And in that moment, Mariah felt the full weight of justice. Not the kind delivered in courts or headlines, but the quiet justice of truth finally unveiled. The woman they called unworthy now held everything, yet instead of anger, she met them with silence. Sometimes, the most incredible power is not in revenge, but in watching those who scorned you learn the cost of cruelty. Mariah did not celebrate her triumph with noise or spectacle. She had no need to humiliate the children who had once humiliated her. Instead, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity she had always known, moving through the Donovan estate not as a conqueror, but as a survivor. The wealth, the power, the influence. None of it compared to the peace of knowing that truth had finally spoken for her. The children, stripped of their imagined authority, now faced the painful lesson that their arrogance had earned them. For months, they had mocked her name, spread whispers to discredit her, and cast her out without a shred of compassion. Now, they came knocking with desperate pleas, not because they loved her, but because they needed her. And that was the cruelest irony of all. Their survival depended on the very woman they had rejected. Mariah granted them no vengeance, only boundaries. She supported the empire her husband had built, honoring his vision with integrity. Still, she made it clear, respect was no longer optional. It was the price of admission into her world. For Mariah, the experience carved a permanent truth into her heart. Racism and prejudice may disguise themselves as arrogance, inheritance, or entitlement, but they are always fragile. And when tested, they collapse under the weight of dignity, patience, and truth. Her story was more than personal justice. It was a mirror held up to society, a reminder of how often Black women are dismissed, underestimated, or erased only to rise stronger than ever. And so the question remains for all of us. How many more Marias must endure reign and exile before the world learns that dignity cannot be stolen and truth cannot be silenced?